Hey people, it's Nias talking. Now I'd like to thank Michael Cord. He's a criminal defense lawyer from the city of Philadelphia, and he's on Instagram. That's where I found him, and he posted about this, and I looked this up. This is the Holmesburg prison experiments, and the source I'm using is the muttermuseum.org, and I'm going to leave this and other sources in the description. So this is another Black Holocaust video, the Holmesburg prison experiments. Welcome back, fellow historio-medico enthusiasts, to the latest installments of SEPI Curiosities. Past articles have addressed such curious topics as historic forensics, the mental state of presidential candidates, and grave robbing after grave robbing after grave robbing. This time around, we're dealing with another important topic: medical experiments on prison inmates. Holmesburg opened in 1996 as a prison for the city of Philadelphia. A massive structure with 10 cell blocks, the prison's radical design was based on that of Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary. Holmesburg still stands today. However, it has not served as an active prison since 1995 and is largely a ruin. Between 1951 and 1974, the facility was the site of a series of medical testing programs that would later become the subject of intense controversy, as the medical tests involved experiments conducted upon the inmates themselves. Enter Albert Kligman. In 1951, Dr. Kligman, as a professor of dermatology at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, he went on to be a leader in his field. He later served as the president of the Philadelphia Dermatological Society and the president for the Society for Investigative Dermatology, and earned a Distinguished Achievement Medal for his contribution to dermatology from the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, where he was also a fellow in 2003. He's also the creator of Retin-A, also known as tretinoin, a topical medicine of his own design, now used as acne cream and anti-aging treatment. According to one account, the accomplished dermatologist came to Holmesburg in 1951 to help treat an outbreak of athlete's foot among the inmates. In his eyes, he came across something more valuable in Northeast Philadelphia correctional facility than itchy, burning feet, a treasure trove of potential test subjects. And just from off the off, this sounds a bit like Marion Sims. I covered him in a previous video, who is the father of gynecology and experimented on black women during slavery. But let's just keep going. I'll leave that in the description. All I saw before me were acres of skin, Kligman later told a Philadelphia newspaper reporter. It was like a farmer seeing a field for the first time. Well, that's not creepy or sinister at all. That he talks like a Joseph Mengele in a concentration camp. I see acres of test subjects. I don't know how he actually talked, but it does sound very creepy and sinister. Kligman certainly found fertile soil in the Holmesburg inmates, a predominantly poor African-American population. And this is another thing. People talk about, well, things just affect the poor, or these things affect prison inmates, or the homeless. The majority of the time, these are the African-American population, and for a reason they've been targeted to end up in these positions. Kligman and his associates convinced the prisoners to opt into medical experiments in exchange for small stipends. The facilitators of the experiments reassured them there were no hazardous materials or risk of long-term effects, and hundreds of inmates served as test subjects over the next 20 years. Yes. Under Kligman's supervision, tests focused on the effects of various additives on human skin. These included medicated skin creams for treating various ailments such as ringworm, herpes simplex, and herpes zoster, and bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus staph infection. Other tests exposed prisoners to biological agents such as dioxin, a toxic chemical used in herbicides and an ingredient in Agent Orange, and hallucinatory drugs as part of a federal government program known as Project Often. Inmates involved in the experiment could easily be identified by patchwork patterns of tape on their backs and arms demarcating the numerous skin tests. The tests continued until 1974, when public outcry prompted the researchers to bring the program to an end. Popular accounts during the course of the program were fairly favorable. The use of prisons for medical testing was a common practice. See also malaria experiments on inmates at the Stateville Penitentiary in Illinois is a contemporary example at the time. I'm going to look that one up. I will. However, opinion turned against the Holmesburg experiments following public outcry over the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. And that wasn't actually an experiment because they had the cure. It was just a prolonged torture situation, just see, well, how much suffering can we inflict upon them. Conducted at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama from 1931 to 1972, the study examined rural sharecroppers from the surrounding area in an experiment on the long-term effects of untreated syphilis on the human body, the effects of which are illustrated by this skull and this wax model from the Mutter Museum collection. And I can see, and it is absolutely horrific. I want people who keep talking about the Tuskegee experiments, any person who tries to downplay it by saying it was a long time ago, that person is evil and the straight up devil. Oh my God, I'm going to put this picture, if I can find it, so you can see it in the video. It's just, The syphilitic patients, predominantly poor African-American sharecroppers, were not made aware they suffered from the disease. Rather, their condition was described as quote-unquote bad blood. All the while, scientists monitored the progress of the disease. The program continued even after the development of antibiotics that could combat the disease and did not cease until 1972, when a public backlash entered the program. A lawsuit ensued and the Institute and federal government reached an out-of-court settlement in 1974 for $10 million. Now, even adjusted for inflation, that is not a lot when you consider the damages that have been inflicted. The Tuskegee experiment had long-term consequences, promoting local mistrust in healthcare professionals. In fact, fears over Tuskegee may have played a role in the progression of a tuberculosis outbreak in the region in January 2016. Calls for similar compensation for the Holmesburg inmates persisted for many years after the experiments ceased. During the early 80s, several inmates filed suit against the agencies involved in the experiment, including the City of Philadelphia, the University of Pennsylvania, Dow Chemical, and Kliegman himself. One former test subject, Leotis Jones, received a $40,000 settlement from the City of Philadelphia in 1984. As in the Tuskegee case, the argument over the experiments conducted in Holmesburg revolved around informed consent and whether the volunteers were made properly aware of the risk involved in participating. Informed consent is an important issue, especially when it comes to testing experimental drugs, and debates over what it means and who can give consent continue to this day. In the case of the Holmesburg inmates, Kliegman asserted his experiments followed the proper procedures and emphasized the medical benefits yielded from his research, according to a statement he issued in 1998. As I have stated repeatedly in the past, whenever this issue has arisen, my use of paid prisoners as research subjects in the 1950s and 60s was in keeping with this nation's standard protocol for conducting scientific investigations at the time. To the best of my knowledge, the result of those experiments advanced our knowledge of the pathogenesis of skin disease, and no long-term harm was done to any person who voluntarily participated in the research program. Meanwhile, the former inmates argued that they had not been made fully aware of the risks. As Jones stated during a protest that same year, these tests were unfair, they were barbaric, we were lied to, we were used and were exploited, we were human guinea pigs. And I want to say this, one of the things they often talk about, that we have heard of statutory rape, that it does not matter if a boy or girl consents, if they are below a certain age, they are not capable of making that decision and they cannot consent. In the same way, a person in jail is a person held against their will and held under power by powerful figures like the prison authorities who can make their life harder, and also people who can promise a lot of things that could make their life easier. It's an environment ripe for manipulation and coercion. In such a situation, there can be no such thing as consent in the way we understand it, as in a person who truly has the ability to make a choice. For those of you who watched Squid Game and saw how badly in debt some of those people were and how they volunteered to go back in, but it was only because the situation outside was so bad, that's kind of what we're getting at. Well, what I'm getting at. There have also been those who have argued that by their status as incarcerated individuals, that prisoners cannot make a fully informed consent. Exactly. Because as people legally deprived of certain rights, they are subject to institutional coercion. There are studies arguing for or against inmate medical volunteers as being coerced. The issue is for an illegal and ethical discussion. The debate over informed consent returns to prominence in the late 1990s when Alan Hornblum, a professor of criminal justice at Temple University, published a detailed history of the experiments. Hornblum's first encounter with the Holmesburg inmates was while teaching an adult literary course at the prison in the early 1970s. Naming his book after Kliegman's infamous comments, Hornblum, what was the name of the book? Hornblum documented the experiments through prison records, declassified government papers and inmates' accounts. The shocking accounts depicted in Acres of Skin triggered renewed outrage. In 1998, Jones and several other former inmates staged protests outside the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. On October 29, 2003, 10 former Holmesburg inmates, along with Jones, armed with a megaphone, staged a protest on 22nd Street just outside the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, while Klickman accepted his Distinguished Achievement Award. Protests led to legal action. On October 17, 2000, nearly 300 former inmates filed suit against Klickman, the University of Philadelphia, Dow Chemical, Johnson & Johnson, Ivy Research Laboratories, and the City of Philadelphia, citing mistreatment, exploitation, and lack of disclosure over the severity of the tests. Some argued that they had suffered long-term illnesses as a result of the experiments. The suit demanded financial compensation and free medical care to any inmates who had served as test subjects. However, in 2002, a federal court ruled the statute of limitations had passed and dismissed the case. And I always find these things as incredible. So the government has allowed experiments on people in their care, and they have now ruled that they cannot seek compensation reparations based off of statute of limitations, which obviously favor them. Surely the only statute of limitations in a situation like this, considering that some of these medical experiments could cause lifelong illnesses, should be when the inmates themselves or possibly have themselves died and are no longer around to ask for compensation. That should be the only statute of limitations possible. And even then, like I said before, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to stop. Some people can also inherit genetic damage that they can pass on to children and become sick. The dioxin is one of them as well. That's used in Agent Orange. The question of whether incarcerated individuals should be used as test subjects in medical experiments has been a subject of intense debate, regardless of where one stands on the issue. The Holmesburg prison experiments have become a textbook case addressing ethics and informed consent in medical testing and shaped how we view the issue of medical research on prisoners today. Until next time, catch you on the strange side. So, well, that was very interesting. So a lot of you know what I'm talking about, and we know how this relates to other things which we can't mention on YouTube. Please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. If you want to support this channel, leave my Cash App. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'll leave that there as well. If you want to buy one of my t-shirts, I'll leave that there as well. In my pinned comment, I'm now an affiliate for Champ Boxes, so I'm going to leave that there. And if you could follow my backup channel. And please, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what your thoughts. Peace.